Hello everyone, here's another video on the unit circle. And in this video, we'll be using the procedure where you memorize the coordinates of the reference angles in the first quadrant. Now, just as a review, if your angle is a multiple of 30 degrees and is not even, or a quadrantal angle, or if it has a measure of a multiple of pi over 6, or if it has a 6 in the denominator in radian measures in simplest form, then the cosine of that angle is going to be root 3 over 2. Sine will be 1/2, and its tangent value will be root 3 over 3. Tangent values you don't necessarily have to remember because you can just use a relationship that tangent is sine of theta over cosine of theta. So you can just take your sine value 1/2 divided by your cosine value root 3 over 2. Once you simplify that, you'll get root 3 over 3. So the tangent values you don't necessarily have to memorize because you can just get it mathematically. If your angle is a multiple of 45 degrees and it's not a quadrantal angle, or in radians it has a 4 in the denominator and it's in simplest form, then its sine and cosine value will be the same. It'll be root 2 over 2. Or tangent of this angle will be equal to 1 because the sine and cosine values are the same. Now, if your angle is a multiple of 60 degrees and it's not a quadrantal angle, or if it has a 3 in the denominator in radian measures, that's in simplest form, then the cosine value will be 1/2 and the sine value of the angle will be root 3 over 2. Tangent will be square root of 3. So when you're using this method, you just need to remember the cosine and sine values of these reference angles, and then you're going to use that acronym that we learned in our previous video. All students take Calc, and that tells us which trig function is positive in which quadrant. Let's do a quick review of that. So the mnemonic device, all students take Calc, tells us which trigonometric function is positive in its respective quadrant. So A tells us that in quadrant 1, all of the trigonometric functions are positive. We go counterclockwise, so be careful of that. Next is S, students. That tells us that sine and its reciprocal cosecant are positive in the second quadrant. Take tells us that in the third quadrant, tangent and its reciprocal cotangent are positive in the third quadrant. And Calc tells us that in the fourth quadrant, cosine and secant are positive in the fourth quadrant. So we're going to be using the reference angles from the first quadrant and using this all students take Calc to find the exact values of some trigonometric functions. We're going to start off with sine of negative 3 pi over 4. Our first step is always to figure out which quadrant the angle is in. So you can either draw the reference angle or you can just figure it out. Since our angle is negative, we're going to need to go clockwise instead of counterclockwise. And now recall that each half of the quadrant is a pi radian. So if it's a pi radian, I'm going to split each into quarters because the denominator of the radian measures is 4. So I'm just going to count 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So there is where our reference angle is. Now, we know that this angle is in quadrant 3. And we know that in quadrant 3, only tangent and its reciprocal are positive. So that means that our answer here should be negative. And now we're going to look at our reference angles. When our angle in radians has a denominator of 4, or is a multiple of pi over 4, then the sine value is going to be root 2 over 2. So combining those two concepts, we get an answer of negative root 2 over 2. Let's do another one. Next, we're asked to find cosecant of 7 pi over 4. Again, the radian measure that we're given is in fourths, so I'm going to count to figure out which quadrant it's in. So again, imagine that each half is divided into fourths. So here's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 7/4. So we are in quadrant 4. In quadrant 4, only cosine and its reciprocal secant are positive. So that means that our answer must be negative. Now let's refer to our first quadrant. When your angle is a multiple of pi over 4, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we're going to look at that sine value for our radian measure. So sine of a multiple of pi over 4 is going to be root 2 over 2. But since we're looking for cosecant, we want to take the reciprocal. So I get that it's equal to negative 2 over root 2. We need to rationalize this. Multiply by root 2 over root 2. Root 2 times root 2 is 2. And then we can simplify. These 2's will cancel out, the 2's on the outside. And we're left with negative root 2. Let's do a few more. Let's find tangent of 11 pi over 6. We're going to do the same thing. Let's figure out which quadrant we're in. Our angle is given to us in 6, so let's count in 6. So imagine that each half of the coordinate plane is divided into 6. 1 6, 2 6, 3 6, 4 6, 5 6, 6 6, 7 6, 8 6, 9 6, 10 6, 11 6. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, we should always make sure that it's in simplest form first. Because if this were, let's say 12 pi over 6, 12 divided by 6 would give you 2 pi. So then 2 pi would be over here, and it wouldn't be angle that has a reference angle of pi over 6 degrees. Most of the angles that you'll be getting will be in simplest form already though, but you always want to check to make sure that it is. So we know that in quadrant 4, only cosine and secant will be positive. So we know our answer is going to be negative. Now let's refer to our reference angles. When your angle is a multiple of pi over 6, or when your angle in radians has a 6 in the denominator and it's in simplest form, then its tangent value will be root 3 over 3. So we get an answer negative root 3 over 3. Next, we're asked to find cosecant of negative 5 pi over 6. Since our angle measure is negative, we need to go clockwise, and we're going to do the same thing again, where we're going to count in 6. So 1 6, 2 6, 3 6, and 3 6 is in the is on the axis because 3 6 is 1/2, right? And the quadrantal angles are multiples of 1/2. 4 6, 5 6. In quadrant 3, only tangent and cotangent are positive, so our answer is going to be negative. Now let's refer to our reference angles. Ideally, you will have these memorized, but since we're just starting to get familiar with the unit circle, it's okay to have a cheat sheet, but ideally you will want to remember the values. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we're going to be looking at the y value. Looking over here, because our angle has a 6 in the denominator, sine value is going to be 1/2. We want to take the reciprocal of that. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2. So we get that cosecant of negative 5 pi over 6 is negative 2. Let's do one last problem together. For number 6, we're asked to find cotangent of 0 degrees, or 0 radians. 0 radians occurs on the positive side of the x-axis, and it's associated with the point 1 0. Now, if tangent is sine over cosine, since cotangent is the reciprocal, cotangent is going to be cosine over sine. So let's take the cosine value over the sine value. We get 1 over 0, and this is undefined. That's it for our extra lesson on the unit circle. Please feel free to contact me if you're still confused about the unit circle. I will send you more resources, or we can schedule a one-on-one session where we can talk more about the unit circle. I hope you have a wonderful day, and take care.